What if I told you the Fast and Furious franchise stopped obeying physics somewhere around the moment a safe started drifting through city streets like it weighed nothing? And from that point forward, the laws of motion became optional, gravity became a suggestion, and survival became a guarantee. Not metaphorically, literally. Because when you look closely at these movies, the question is not how they bend physics, it is how aggressively they ignore it. And the wild part is, that is exactly why they work. This is Fast and Furious versus physics. And physics is losing. Let's start with torque and mass. In Fast 5, Dom and Brian drag a multi-ton bank fought through Io with 2 Dodge Chargers, accelerating, cornering, smashing reinforced concrete, and somehow not instantly snapping the cables or flipping the cars into oblivion. A real fault weighs several tons. Add friction, add inertia, add momentum during a high-speed turn. The force required would either rip the chassis apart or send the car spinning uncontrollably. Instead, they drifted like it is a shopping cart. That scene alone violates traction limits, tensile strength, structural rigidity, and basic center of mass stability. And yet it looks unstoppable. And that was just street level. Now escalate to runway logic. In Fast and Furious 6, the infamous airplane sequence takes place on what appears to be a runway several miles long, because the plane keeps accelerating while the crew keeps fighting on top of moving vehicles. A typical commercial runway is around 2 to 3 miles at most. The plane in that scene would have taken off long before the fight choreography even reached its midpoint. Thrust-to-weight ratio says lift happens quickly at that scale. Instead, the runway becomes infinite, time stretches. Speed becomes cinematic, not physical. Distance stops meaning anything, then we reach gravity denial. In Furious 7, cars are launched between skyscrapers in Abu Dhabi. One hypercar smashes through glass, lands perfectly inside another tower, regains traction mid-air, and continues driving. Realistically, once the car leaves the first building, its trajectory is locked by velocity and angle. There is no mid-air steering correction without external force. No invisible rails guiding it, just gravity, which would pull it straight down. Instead, it threads the skyline like it has wings. Momentum becomes choreography. Let's talk about durability. Human durability. Dom survives high-speed collisions, collapsing buildings, brutal fistfights, and explosive shockwaves at distances that would rupture internal organs. A car flipping multiple times at highway speed produces forces that shred the human body even with modern safety systems. The G-forces alone can cause traumatic injury. But in this universe, seat belts and sheer willpower are enough. Bruises fade. Bones hold. Heroes walk away. Impact has no consequence. And then we reach the space sequence. Yes, in F9, 2 characters go to space in a car with a rocket engine strapped to it, wearing makeshift suits, surviving re-entry with minimal preparation. Space travel requires controlled ascent, precise shielding, heat-resistant materials, oxygen regulation, radiation protection, and carefully calculated descent angles to avoid burning up or skipping of the atmosphere. Instead, they improvise in orbit, dock with a satellite, and come home like it was a road trip. The vacuum of space becomes just another location. Atmosphere becomes optional, but here is where it gets interesting. The franchise does not accidentally break physics. It escalates past it on purpose. Each installment raises the ceiling, from street racing to heists, from heists to global espionage, from espionage to near superhero spectacle. If the early films were about quarter-mile realism, the later ones are about myth building through machinery. Cars stop being vehicles. They become extensions of character identity. Physics becomes flexible because the emotional logic is stronger than the scientific one. Stakes shift from real to operatic. Even the idea of family operates like a force field. Characters once presumed dead return. Alliances override logic. Enemies become teammates. Survival odds defy statistical probability. The narrative says connection is stronger than entropy. And entropy is one of the most unforgiving laws in physics. Systems decay. Energy disperses. Structures collapse. Yet this crew only expands. Disorder never wins. Now imagine applying strict physics to just one of these climaxes. Real braking distances. Real fuel limits. Real blast radii. Real reaction times. The spectacle collapses instantly. Because the franchise is no longer grounded in mechanical plausibility. It is grounded in escalation expectation. The audience does not ask, could that happen? The audience asks, how much further will they go? And that question keeps evolving. Logic becomes secondary to scale. So here is the tension that defines the entire saga. If every law of motion has already been bent, if gravity has already been ignored, if space itself has already been conquered with duct tape engineering, then what remains? What is the next boundary to cross? Underwater megastructures, orbital highways, multiversal street races? Or does the franchise attempt the impossible and bring things back down to asphalt? Because once you outrun physics, the only thing left to challenge is consequence. Let's go deeper, because the real war against physics is not just about gravity or explosions. It is about energy transfer, reaction timing, and structural collapse. And this franchise treats all three like background noise. Take bridge destruction sequences, where vehicles jump across collapsing concrete segments that are actively breaking apart beneath them. In reality, once structural supports fail, load redistribution happens chaotically, sections drop unpredictably, angles shift violently, and the surface becomes unstable within fractions of a second. A 2-ton car hitting fractured concrete at speed would lose traction instantly, suspension would misalign, rotation would spike, and the jump trajectory would collapse into a downward plunge. Instead, cars launch with perfect timing, like the collapse itself is choreographed to support them. Timing becomes scripted fate. Now examine magnetic force manipulation in F9, where industrial strength magnets are used to yank vehicles sideways through city streets, slamming them into walls, redirecting trajectories mid-chase. Real magnetic fields strong enough to move multi-ton objects would also affect surrounding infrastructure, metal debris, nearby cars, weapons, power grids. The force would not be selective. It would be chaotic, uncontrolled, and the sudden lateral acceleration on passengers would cause severe spinal trauma. Instead, the magnets behave like remote control grappling hooks. Targeted, precise, cinematic. Force obeys narrative intent. Let's talk about suspension of friction limits during mountain descents. Vehicles barrel down steep terrain, dirt, rock, ice, somehow maintaining grip while cornering at speed. Realistically, tire friction coefficients on loose surfaces drop dramatically, especially under rapid directional change. Centripetal force would push the vehicle outward, traction would break, rollover probability would skyrocket. Instead, the cars carve perfect arcs, hugging terrain like rally legends with infinite grip. No tire degradation, no overheating brakes, no loss of control. Traction becomes loyalty. Then there is the matter of explosive overpressure. Characters routinely stand within meters of massive detonations. Real explosions produce shockwaves that rupture lungs, burst eardrums, disorient the nervous system. Even if shrapnel misses, the pressure wave alone can incapacitate. Yet in this universe, a fireball expands, glass shatters, vehicles flip, and the crew emerges with light debris dust on their shoulders, walking, focused, ready for the next punch. Shockwaves lose their shock. Consider mid-air vehicle interception. Cars collide in mid-jump, doors open during flight, characters leap between moving vehicles suspended above ravines. Physics says once airborne, both vehicles follow ballistic trajectories defined by initial velocity and gravity. Relative motion between them becomes extremely unstable. One small deviation means catastrophic miss. Air resistance, spin, pitch, yaw all amplify unpredictability. But here, they align like synchronized swimmers at highway speed. Chaos turns cooperative. Now shift to fuel and endurance logic. High output engines running at maximum throttle through extended chase sequences would burn fuel at extreme rates. Engine temperatures would spike. Oil pressure fluctuations would risk seizure. Brake systems would fade. Transmission components would fail under sustained stress. Instead, engines scream endlessly without overheating. Nitrous systems behave like renewable energy sources. Mechanical fatigue does not exist. Thermodynamics takes a vacation. And then there is the human reaction window. At 100 miles per hour, a vehicle travels nearly 150 feet per second. Human reaction time averages around 0.25 seconds under ideal conditions. That means before a driver even processes a sudden obstacle, the car has already traveled dozens of feet. Yet characters dodge collapsing debris, incoming vehicles, and gunfire with millisecond precision. Steering corrections happen instantly. Decisions feel purely calculated. Reflex beats reality. Even structural integrity inside urban warfare sequences defies material science. Concrete pillars absorb repeated impacts without immediate shear failure. Glass shatters dramatically but rarely impales. Steel beams bend instead of snapping. Load-bearing walls collapse only when narratively convenient. Real materials fracture according to stress thresholds, not emotional timing. But here, architecture cooperates with survival arcs. Matter respects momentum of myth, because once you outrun physics, probability becomes optional. And here is the deeper layer. The franchise subtly transitions its characters into something beyond elite drivers. They operate like kinetic tacticians, predicting vectors, reading terrain, manipulating mass at speed. It is less street racing, more battlefield geometry. The car is no longer transportation. It is a physics-defying extension of will. Machine becomes extension of myth.so the escalation question returns, not louder, but sharper. If gravity, magnetism, combustion, structural engineering, and human tolerance have already been stretched to cinematic extremes, what is the next threshold to violate without tipping fully into self-parody? Do they bend time perception during chases? Do they introduce AI-assisted driving that calculates impossible maneuvers in real time? Do they embrace near superhero durability openly instead of implying it? Because once speed becomes invincibility, the only remaining limit is whether the audience still feels risk. Let's break down cable mechanics. In multiple scenes across the franchise, vehicles are attached to steel cables during jumps, rescues, or mid-air recoveries. The tension forces involved in stopping or redirecting a moving two-ton car at high velocity would exceed the tensile strength of most commercial steel cables. When a fast-moving object is suddenly restrained, the impulse force spikes massively in milliseconds. That kind of load does not stretch politely. It snaps, or it rips the anchor point out of whatever it is attached to. Yet in these sequences, cables hold steady, cars swing smoothly, and mounting points stay intact as if engineered for spacecraft docking. Tension without rupture. Now let's talk about vehicle collisions and conservation of momentum. In reality, when a heavier vehicle strikes a lighter one, momentum transfer follows strict equations. The lighter car accelerates violently, the heavier vehicle decelerates proportionally. But in fast and furious fights, Dom's car hits opponents and barely slows down, while enemy vehicles launch sideways like toys. That violates basic mass distribution and momentum exchange. A frontal impact at high speed should heavily damage both frames, alter steering geometry, and compromise drivability instantly. Instead, Dom keeps pushing forward like he is moving through cardboard props. Momentum becomes selective. Consider vertical drop survivability. There are multiple sequences where cars fall significant distances, of cliffs, from bridges, from elevated highways, landing nose first or flat. A vertical drop, even from 30 to 50 feet, creates massive deceleration forces on impact. Suspension systems are not designed for that kind of pure vertical load. Axles bend, control arms snap, tires burst, chassis frames twist. Yet these cars land compressed dramatically and continue driving as if they just hit a speed bump. Gravity without aftermath. Now examine rolling resistance during extended sideways drifts. Tires under extreme lateral slip generate enormous heat. Prolonged drifting destroys tire integrity within minutes. Rubber degrades, grip vanishes, blowouts become likely. In the franchise, cars drift through entire city blocks, through intersections, through debris fields, without visible tire wear, without smoke density matching friction load, without loss of control. Realistically, by the end of those sequences, rims would be scraping asphalt. Friction without cost. Next violation. Structural roof integrity during flips. When a car flips multiple times, the roof crush resistance becomes critical. Real vehicles are engineered with reinforced pillars, but repeated high-speed rolls compromise the survival space rapidly. Windshields implode. Frames deform. Yet characters inside these rolling vehicles experience cinematic turbulence rather than lethal compression. The cabin space remains magically intact. Doors still open afterward. Rotation without collapse. Now let's hit fluid dynamics. During high-speed chases involving tanker trucks or fuel spills, vehicles drive through flammable liquid zones without immediate ignition risk proportional to friction and spark exposure. Real fuel vapor mixed with oxygen creates extremely volatile environments. One stray spark from metal scraping asphalt can trigger detonation. Instead, cars weave through explosive hazards that ignite only when narratively dramatic. Combustion waits its turn, and here is a subtle one. Steering geometry at extreme angles. During high-speed cornering, wheels visibly turn far beyond realistic steering lock limits. Real performance vehicles have maximum steering angles constrained by suspension geometry and tire clearance. Excessive angle at high velocity causes immediate oversteer and spin out. In these films, front wheels appear to defy mechanical limits, holding absurd drift angles while maintaining forward thrust. Mechanics ignore geometry. Let's talk about bridge cable swings again, but differently. When a car swings off a broken bridge using a cable and lands on the opposite side, the pendulum physics should dictate a predictable arc. The car's mass, cable length, and gravity define the swing path. Any deviation in release timing changes landing drastically. In reality, most of those jumps would undershoot or overshoot catastrophically. Instead, release timing aligns perfectly every time, as if gravitational constants are negotiable. Pendulum without unpredictability, now braking distances. At 120 miles per hour, even high-performance brake systems require significant distance to reach zero velocity. Heat buildup reduces effectiveness. Brake fade becomes real. Yet vehicles in the franchise slam brakes and stop within implausibly short distances, sometimes on loose surfaces. That deceleration would require tire grip beyond physical limits and would likely cause loss of directional control. Instead, cars hold precisely where needed. Deceleration defies math. And finally, energy absorption in head-on impacts. When two vehicles collide at speed, the kinetic energy involved is enormous. Crumple zones are designed to absorb that energy by deforming irreversibly. After such an impact, those cars are not drivable. Structural alignment is compromised. Steering fails. Yet in these films, cars endure repeated high-energy crashes and remain fully operational for the next chase. Energy disappears because once structural limits vanish, engineering becomes decoration, and here is the real escalation point. If material strength, momentum transfer, braking physics, and combustion risk have all been ignored, then the next logical boundary is biological physics again. How far can the human body be pushed before the audience stops accepting survival? How many G-forces? How many impacts? How many near-miss shockwaves? Because at some point, even cinematic physics needs a new rule to break. Let's break down torque distribution during sudden direction reversals. In several chase scenes, cars instantly switch from full forward acceleration to aggressive reverse or rapid spin turns without visible drivetrain stress. Real transmissions, especially in high-performance builds, cannot tolerate abrupt gear changes at high RPM without catastrophic failure. The gearbox teeth would shear. The drift shaft could snap. The differential would absorb extreme shock load. Instead, engines scream, gears slam, and nothing breaks. No fluid leaks. No mechanical hesitation. Drivetrains ignore shock load. Now look at vehicle weight transfer during vertical climbs. In multiple sequences, cars climb near vertical surfaces, debris piles, even crumbling structures, maintaining traction where physics says the center of gravity should pull them backward into a flip. When incline angles exceed traction limits, especially with rear-heavy muscle cars, torque causes wheel spin, not ascent. The front lifts. The vehicle stalls or rolls. Yet in this universe, throttle equals victory. Tires grip impossible surfaces like adhesive. Incline without rollback. Next, mid-air rotational stability. When a car launches off a ramp at an angle, it should rotate based on torque applied at takeoff. If the rear wheels accelerate mid-air, rotational inertia causes pitch changes. If brakes lock mid-flight, the nose tips. These are measurable dynamics used in stunt driving. Yet in these films, cars adjust orientation mid-air with precision that suggests invisible gyroscopes. They land flat, aligned, perfectly aimed at narrow targets. No uncontrolled roll. No spin variance. Inertia becomes optional. Let's talk about structural chain reactions. In large destruction scenes, collapsing infrastructure behaves in delayed sequence rather than instantaneous failure. When support columns are compromised, load redistribution accelerates collapse rapidly, often unpredictably. Instead, structures crumble in cinematic waves, giving drivers just enough time to escape each segment in rhythm. Real collapse does not wait for dramatic timing. It cascades violently. Failure follows choreography. Another violation: projectile ballistics during moving gunfights. Characters fire from fast-moving vehicles with extreme accuracy while both shooter and target are in motion. Real-world ballistics account for relative velocity, wind resistance, recoil compensation, vehicle vibration, and angular displacement. Shooting precisely from a car bouncing at 80 miles per hour is exponentially more difficult than portrayed. Yet targets are hit cleanly, consistently. even during evasive maneuvers. Velocity loses its variables. Now consider underwater vehicle survival. When cars plunge into deep water, pressure increases rapidly with depth. Electronics short out. Engines hydrolock. Cabin pressure shifts. Doors become extremely difficult to open due to water resistance and pressure differential. Yet vehicles submerge. Occupants exit cleanly, sometimes even re-enter, without realistic disorientation or mechanical failure timelines. Pressure without consequence. And then there is thermal exposure. Vehicles pass through active fire zones repeatedly. Engine bays absorb extreme radiant heat. Paint does not blister realistically. Fuel lines do not ignite proportionally. Tire compounds do not degrade under sustained flame proximity. Real thermal thresholds for automotive materials are very clear. Cross them, and systems fail fast. In these films, heat becomes atmosphere, not threat. Temperature bends quietly. Now we reach acceleration curves. From standstill to highway speed in seconds, repeatedly, in heavy armored vehicles carrying multiple passengers and weapons. Real acceleration depends on power-to-weight ratio. Add armor plating, and you reduce performance dramatically. Yet armor builds move like stripped-down race cars. No turbo lag, no traction loss, no torque delay. Mass stops mattering, because once mass stops mattering, everything becomes spectacle. And here is the final tension. Across this franchise, gravity has been reduced, momentum has been rewritten, combustion has been tamed, structural engineering has been choreographed, human tolerance has been amplified, mechanical fatigue has been erased. Every foundational law that governs vehicles in the real world has been stretched beyond its breaking point. So what is left, if the next installment wants to escalate again? It must either invent a new rule to violate, or it must reintroduce consequence. Real consequence. Because there is one law that even this universe cannot fully escape without changing its identity. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It must go somewhere, and the longer this saga keeps absorbing impact without cost, the more the audience starts waiting for the moment when something finally does not walk away. Because if physics never wins, then the only way to raise the stakes is to let it win once.